In the second half of the 20th century, African American athletes not only gained acceptance in a more diversified America, they became sports icons. Yet in the tradition-rich sport of kings, known for its kaleidoscope of colors on the racetrack, the faces of jockeys tell another story, a story unique in American sports history. Latin Americans, such as all-time winning jockey Lafitte Pincay Jr., play important roles in racing. Female jockeys are becoming more prevalent. But in the modern racing era, black riders are few and far between. But surprisingly to many, African American jockeys dominated the first runnings of the Kentucky Derby in the late 1800s. Their accomplishments were largely ignored for almost a century, but their legacy runs deep in the sporting roots of Americana.
Well, they are the beginning. See, they always said that Jackie Robinson was the first black in sports, but he wasn't. African-American jockeys were the first in sports.
Who were these early American sports legends, and why did they virtually disappear from the track and the history books? Coming up, the Forgotten Heroes, the remarkable tale of African-American jockeys. In their era, the best African-American jockeys were nationally known sports figures, and perhaps the most celebrated of them all was Isaac Murphy.
Isaac Murphy emerges as a superstar. We might even think of him as Michael Jordan of his day.
I mean, he was the greatest rider, the greatest athlete of the century, everyone thought, and he was certainly the top athlete, the highest paid athlete at the time in American sports.
Any newspaper reporter who really wanted to know what was going on in the spring would make an appointment with Isaac Murphy.
He was brilliant and very much an intellectual. He gave these long, endless interviews. So that was one of the reasons the press loved him. He was a great copy.
Murphy was also a great judge of pace, and his dramatic off-the-pace style came to be known as the gallery, or grandstand finish. He battled weight problems throughout his career, but in 1890 he charged from last place aboard Riley to become the first jockey to win the Kentucky Derby twice. The next year, Murphy rode Kingman and became the first to win the Derby 3 times, a record he held or shared for 55 years. Also in 1890, Murphy participated in a historic match race at Sheepshead Bay Racetrack in New York. He rode the Suburban Handicap winner and Horse of the Year Salvador for owner James Ben Ali Hagan. His opposition was Tenny, ridden by Edward Snapper Garrison.
Murphy always used the English seat, sitting straight upright, and Snapper Garrison is crouched down in what they called the American seat, crouched over. This was an incredible race. The whole country was following it, so to speak, when the newspapers the next day. No radio, no television. So they're really dying to find out about this race because it was set up as the match of the century. If there was like a Tom Durkin to call this race, he probably would have lost his voice or something.
Murphy and Salvador won the match of the century by a head. Another famous photograph shows the nattily-dressed Murphy celebrating his victory with other horsemen at a clambake, where champagne was flowing.
He had a fondness for champagne. Now, the extent to which this added to what was already problems with an abundance of calories, we can't really tell yet.
A few weeks later, Murphy rode a favorite at Monmouth in another major race.
And when they got to the finish, Murphy was nowhere in sight. He was way behind, and he struggled to the finish and fell off the horse. And this was, if you can imagine, today's leading act is happening to somebody like Tiger Woods or somebody, fell into a heap on the ground off the horse and was suspended.
Whether Murphy had been drinking, was weak from binge dieting, or was poisoned as he claimed, his career was never quite the same. 6 years later, Isaac Murphy was dead at age 35. His death was widely attributed to a reported drinking problem.
On his death certificate, pneumonia is listed as a cause, but there were some complications, undoubtedly, that were related to the purging, the flipping that he engaged in to try to keep his weight down.
More than 60 years later, a search for Murphy's grave ensued, sparked by Kenan Library historian Amelia Buckley, who believed that published reports of Murphy's burial in New Orleans were inaccurate. The frustrating 3-year search was carried out by Lexington journalist Frank Borries.
They did some extensive research and located his grave at an African-American cemetery in the east part of Lexington that had been long abandoned. His story was recaptured and now can be known by generations yet to come.
The remains of at least 9 other black jockeys have been found in the same cemetery, which is being restored and is still known simply as African Cemetery No. 2. Murphy's body was moved twice and now rests at the Kentucky Horse Park in Lexington, next to the grave of another American racing legend, the racehorse Man-O-War.